This is a hidden secret place somewhere in Berkeley, and I have the great privilege of sitting opposite to Dr. Claudio Naranjo. This is magic, and this is something I have been dreaming about for so many years, since I have read all your books and so on. So tell me, Dr. Naranjo, this is actually where it once started for you.
Well, it started for me in a way, and many things started here. I came to Berkeley in the tail end of a scholarship that I spent mostly in Harvard. And then somebody invited me to come to see what was done in IPAR, Institute of Personality Assessment and Research. I was doing a study on values, and it was suggested I would like to know about how they did personality assessments there. But a month here or two perhaps were enough to make me fall in love with Berkeley and come back on a Guggenheim a couple of years later. Then I fell in love with a woman in Berkeley and fell in love with many things in Berkeley. It was very important in my life, and many things were starting then. It was a time of the free speech movement. I was Chilean. I am a Chilean-born person. I was never patriotic, and I never felt understood in my own land. And this was the first place where I felt at home. I felt this was like an oasis for seekers. I had been a seeker, but I had never found other seekers.
I know.
And this was a massive place of seekers, or a gathering of seekers.
So you decided quite immediately that this is actually the place for you to work and live?
I felt at home. I felt very drawn to the place. There were many people who had been to Japan and come back. The place was filled with Zen gossip, stories about people experiencing things in Japan. And I was very much interested in Zen training myself. In the end, I didn't go to Japan. I didn't even go to spend time at the Zen monastery. I was initiated to meditation by Suzuki Roshi. It was a great opportunity. But I never chose the monastic life with the alternative of Berkeley so near. I preferred a less regulated life, and I guess I preferred more a shamanistic way of following my nose day by day, rather than fitting into a structured discipline. It was such a rich place that option faded out in the course of time.
But you did have a background in psychotherapy and as a psychiatrist too in Chile. And I remember having read your book, The Healing Journey. I was very much impressed by the things you talked about. For instance, feeling enhancers was something very new and exciting to me.
It fell on me. It was a kind of good luck that I discovered that kind of substances, of which the best known today is the so-called ecstasy, MDMA. And now they have changed the name. Some people speak of entactogens, some speak of empathogens, which to me are very mystifying names, and they want to sound scientific. I would call them feeling optimizers. Optimizing in the sense of this awareness feeling, but this awareness brings in a coming of feelings into place. The optimization of feeling ends in love, in the experience of love, but it begins with the awareness of pain. These are substances that bring you, they're not hallucinogens, definitely different kinds, but bring you in touch with your inner disturbance. They intensify the desire for cure and the awareness of something to be cured. So they don't take you to paradise or to hell like the big psychedelics, but they take you to purgatory. And when purgatory is over, then comes the Garden of Eden. That is a healthy state. Like one of my early volunteers when I was experimenting with these substances, he described the state of letting time flow with graceful ease.
That's a wonderful expression.
Yeah. Serenity and warmth, sanity.
You know, to me it's very strange that these substances haven't been used more in the field of psychotherapy and in psychiatric treatments. How come?
Well, this country is making it very difficult, has always made it very difficult to people interested in drugs that expand consciousness in any way. This country endorses drugs that diminish consciousness.
Oh, that's
depressors.
True. Yes.
Alcohol is okay, anesthesia is okay, antidepressants, antipsychotic drugs, all that is the big business of laboratories. But drugs that make you more conscious, I suppose, are felt to be to entail some political danger. People cannot be programmed so easily when they are psychedelic users of any kind. Even marijuana doesn't go along with a nation of lambs. If you want to conduct a kind of politics that relies heavily on the media and buying into a view of things, that would not be compatible with psychedelic culture. So I think it is a political situation that speaks the language of medicine and the dangers of addiction and all that, but I think it's really bullshit. Okay. That the dangers are not so great if they were regulated, if they were like amphetamines, drugs that needed a prescription. That would be enough to put them under medical control. But the measure of repression, the degree of repression goes beyond that, and I think there are hidden political causes behind that.
Okay.
And some countries have taken exception, of course. Holland and Switzerland are countries that have been remarkable in that they contested the recommended policy of the World Health Organization, which is so much influenced by American views.
You know, I remember having read a very fascinating story, Claudio, about you going into the Amazons trying to get a substance there that, okay, maybe you could tell a little more about that.
Well, that substance today is very well known and popular, but it was not known then. I was the first person to really experiment with it and to bring it into an urban setting.
And what year was this?
1962. I was, as I mentioned, I was spending a season in Harvard on a Fulbright fellowship. I walked into an exhibit. In my walk to campus every morning, I saw the Botanical Museum and announcement, Economic Botany exhibit. And I was never interested in it, but when it was time almost to leave town, I said, I'll see what this is about. And there were little exhibits with plants of different kinds and vials of the chemical products, like the coca plant display, and the leaves and the flowers, and the little vial with cocaine, and then the opium plant, and many, many vials of the different alkaloids of opium. And one of these windows was on a picture of Indians, naked Indians painted with feathers, and an Indian was whipping another. And there was a reprint on the botanical identity of the malpighiaceous narcotics of South America. And my father had lent me a book when I was still in medical school that was called I Too Was a Headhunter, written by an American adventurer, an explorer who got lost in the Venezuelan jungle, opened a path with a machete into a stream, inflated a inflatable canoe, and they had to do a very difficult journey through the rapids, getting out of the canoe every time the rapids would have made it impossible to continue, and opening a path with his machete to be able to go to the next level. And it was thoroughly infected with malaria, and in the end he would have been killed by the Indians if he had not been unconscious. He was drifting along unconscious, deeply sick, and the Indians picked him up and nursed him, and in the end, when he was okay, there was no role for him in this very remote, isolated tribe unless he underwent an initiation to be a warrior like everybody else at his age. So he describes in this book the initiation of the warriors he underwent, where whipping was an important element, but he was given a bitter liquid in a hollow coconut, and this drink that he had made him heroic. And as soon as I read that, I wanted to be able to try that bitter concoction to see whether that would make me a little less fearful and timid a creature and more impervious to physical pain. And I thought, of course, this would be a good research project. This could have very useful results in psychotherapy, to some a specific stimulant of courage, given the fact that so much of psychological problems comes from fear. And I formed a research project. We talked with Maturana, who's now very famous through his ideas of autopoiesis, and we thought of going into the jungle supposedly in search of some kind of insectivore that is the evolutionary line of humans before our primate ancestors. He would do eye physiology research on vision, but this would be an occasion for me to do, as a sideline, this research for this plant. But the information was so scanty and it was such a dangerous proposition, given the fact that Indians that I knew used this were headhunters. So in the end I gave it up. I was too lazy about it, got involved in other things. Years passed until I saw this picture and I saw this publication. So I talked to the librarian at the museum. How could I read this reprint that you have in the window? And she saw my level of interest was such, I was so serious about it, I was so passionate about wanting to know more, that she said, I think you should talk about this with the museum curator, who happens to be the author of this reprint, Dr. Schultes. I didn't know about the existence of Dr. Schultes then, but in the end Dr. Schultes put me in touch with the Indians that collected plants for him, and he gave his blessings of my first research project, which was one of going to the region of the Putumayo, affluent, a tributary of the Amazon in Colombia, southern Colombia, between Colombia and Ecuador. Okay. And I collected plants and I collected information about Yahe.
But did you go there all by yourself, or did you have friends with you?
I had one friend who was the head programmer here in the computer center, Geo Wiederholt. Okay. Wiederholt. He was just an adventurer. We met at a Berkeley party. He said, wherever you go, I want to go too. And once he heard me talk about this project, and I was very happy, and it was a very fortunate thing that he came along. He was a very practical person and a very good sense of orientation in the jungle and in the open air too. I would have gotten lost a few times if it were not for him. And we went there and we hired a man with a dugout canoe with an overboard motor to go against the stream, and visited many Indians and had translators along the way. And it's a long story how I managed to get the confidence of these Indians. I introduced myself as a fellow medicine man from another culture, which is true. I'm a medicine man. Yeah. I don't have your plants, I said, but I have other products. And I had impregnated paper with LSD, with drops of LSD, and made drawings on this paper. And I knew by the drawings whether it was plant motifs or bones or stars, that differentiated the dosage. And so I told them, these magic drawings, if you put them under your tongue, you will get something like what I am interested in. So I want to know your plant. I was interested in ayahuasca and what you put into it. And they were willing to collaborate, but I was not so trusting that nothing bad could happen to me if they go onto a paranoid trip and I'm there with headhunters in a expanded state of consciousness or in an altered state of consciousness that was not convenient to me. So I left them with the product and I went along with my canoe upstream.
Fantastic story, Claudio.
But that opened many doors, and they gave me plants, products, and Geo Wiederholt stayed longer in Colombia and scraped the bark, which is the most rich in alkaloid content, and sent this product to Chile, and I did many experiments in Chile. And in the process of experimenting, I not only did pharmacological research, but I did some self-experimenting and eventually psychotherapeutic research. First it was get a sense of what this is good for, what does it do if you don't program people to expect something definite. There were indications that the Indians use it to train themselves in flying out of the body and seeing at a distance. Telepathic, parapsychology training. And there were indications that this could be used therapeutically, or I had this expectation. And the images that were described by explorers and anthropologists were so similar. There were so many tigers and snakes in them that I wanted to know whether this was cultural, was an artifact, or whether it was really intrinsic to the effect of the drug. And actually people who didn't know anything about what they were taken, but only you are being a volunteer for using an experimental subject that will do things to your mind that we don't know about, but I can guarantee that it's going to be safe, and it lasts maybe about 6 hours. Knowing only that, many people saw tigers, jaguars, and snakes. So for a long time I was wondering, is this a telepathic connection with the South American Indians, or is it something intrinsic to the effects of yahe, or as it is called today, ayahuasca, because now there has emerged a church in Brazil that uses it, and many Americans are tuned into that church. Actually, I'm invited by that church sometimes in Brazil to conduct sessions there. I'm recognized as a sort of somebody who has an equivalence with their priests. I can acknowledge as a person who is ready to conduct sessions. So this has allowed me to bring into my experience also other elements. They emphasize the devotional use of music while singing, and then I have done much in the last 20 years. When I go to Brazil, even though my psychedelic explorer life has been in parentheses, because in this country I wouldn't do anything against the law, being a naturalized citizen, especially. Anyhow, I didn't even before then. Would be too dangerous. But in Brazil this is not illegal, and being invited by a church to do this has given me occasion to keep alive this part of my exploration. And of course I've wanted to bring in the Indian devotional contribution and use mantra, and not only Christian hymns. And so there's a long story of that.
But you have written very much about this in your book, The Healing Journey. Is it in any ways possible to buy that book today, Claudio? Or is it really, it seems to be out of print?
It's been out of print a long time. In Berkeley at least you can find it in used bookstores, and it's very expensive when you find it. It's a rare thing. I've been asked to reprint it many times, and it's not my priority to republish that old book. I would prefer to publish new things, even in that field, because I've written so much that I have not published, and so my priority is to get new books out first.
Another of your books that made a very great impact on me when I was studying psychology, that is your book on meditation, which I found quite extraordinary. When did your interest in meditation awoke, Claudio? You did meet some, I guess, very interesting gurus who taught you.
Well, throughout my life I've had gurus in each great tradition. I was lucky enough to have teachings from the disciple of the last Taoist patriarch, for instance, or from a very gifted tantric teacher in India. I concentrated on Buddhism in the end. I've had teachings from many of the great Tibetans, and in the end, my most influential influence on my own practice has been Buddhist, even though what started me was a Sufi teacher. What opened me, but what took care of my needs after being opened was mostly Tibetan Buddhism. But the beginning of my writing a book, the first stimulus was an invitation from a man called John Mann, who was a sociologist and also a disciple of Rudy, a man called Rudy in New York, who was a disciple of Muktananda's teacher. What's his name? I forget now, strangely. It was a great guru that Muktananda always referred to. And I feel I got some direct transmission through John Mann, some energy transmission. It's the first time I started getting shivers in meditation.
Talking about meditation, Claudio, what is the essence? How would you describe meditation to somebody who has no idea about it?
There are different ways of doing it, depending on what levels of meditation you're dealing with. First approximation is the practice of stepping beyond your ego in the simplest situation, which is not the situation of relating to the world or relating to other people. That's too complicated. The ego is the only thing we have. We have habits of relation built on that. But while sitting alone, the condition of one's mind is normally one beclouded with ego. We are so to say possessed by a mind parasite. We each have our specific kind of mind parasite. Some people are too vain and they're always trying to be somebody. Even when they're in silent alone, they're upholding their great image and having internal dialogues with themselves to be somebody. And other people are too shy and they're inhibited, and even by sitting by themselves they're shrinking and not letting themselves really be there and occupy their space. So there are ways of dealing subtly with the mind. In a way, there are different exercises in relinquishing ego control. But the deepest level of meditation is recognizing who you really are. And that recognition of who am I or what am I goes beyond the individual level, amounts to the same thing as what is the essence of existence, or what is the core of reality. So I would say the gist of meditation is wisdom. The ultimate purpose of meditation is an understanding of the teachings, understanding of that which all the teachings of the different traditions are about.
Is meditation, Claudio, something you turn to when you get older and want to get some perspective on your life, or is it possible even for young people, you think, to benefit from meditation? People today seem to be very restless and doing all kinds of things at the same time. Would you suggest that, for instance, a 14, 15-year-old boy or girl could benefit from meditation? And how would that come to be? How would you suggest them to start?
Well, this is a very interesting question for many reasons. One is that, in fact, when we are old, we become yogis whether we like it or not. If yoga is doing without certain things, is austerity, not being supported in applause, not being supported in entertainment, not being supported in recognition, but preparing for the ultimate journey beyond this life, then senility is a kind of spontaneous yoga, where everything is taken away from us and we have to deal with being empty. And some people use their old age to grow. Other people are not ready to use it because they have wasted too much their life before. The problem with the meditation in youth in an earlier life is motivation. If motivation is there, which involves a need for some culture of what is the purpose of meditation, I think it would be very important. At least one could expect from meditation to be a cure for TV addiction.
Yeah.
Today people don't have patience for anything. People can't sit still. People can't attend to the content of anybody's words for too long because they want something happening. They need to be fed. This addiction to stimulation is a TV-created situation, and it's very detrimental. There's I think a decadence in culture due to that the diminishing attention span of people. So meditation begins with concentration, begins with the ability to just be there and focus your mind on something.
If this should be taught in schools, for instance, to children today,
I think it would be very important.
How would you suggest it should
well,
be?
I have a very specific plan for that.
You do? That's interesting. Let's hear about it.
I have been invited now to go and talk at a university in Brazil about the idea of bringing meditation to the curriculum. And since I have a special theory of meditation that spells out the dimensions of meditation, the components of meditation, which are not completely independent, but are something like aspects that converge in a single experience that is, without being complex, is multifaceted at the same time. Like you could say the ultimate achievement in meditation brings you to a condition of love, self-love and love of others. It's like the sun shining on everything. Unconditional love, which comes out of a kind of well-being and abundance, like Maslow has described being abundance. But at the same time, meditation is an exercise in detachment. These things seem to be polar opposites. I say they're a complementarity. Non-attachment and love sound polar opposites. You either have kind of cosmic indifference, and there are states of cosmic indifference, and there are states of love. But there is a condition where these two come together. And the same with freedom and flow. Yes. I would say and stability. Meditation brings the mind to be stable, like a pond where no waves on the surface. The mind is still.
Yes.
But this stillness is not dead stillness, but it's a openness, it's a permeability to everything.
Yes.
Like in Zen it is said, like a sky that is always immobile, it's like eternal, but it lets the clouds go by.
Yeah.
So there are many polarities in meditation, and I have the idea that each of these needs to be cultivated separately.
Okay.
A cultivation of love through devotional practice of some sort, or through music in a non-theistic world, concentration with imagery or with attention to a flame or many way is a secondary, or cultivation of the attitude of letting go, the exercise of surrender, very important to a culture where surrender is it's a very anti-Dionysian world. The door to mystical experience is always a Dionysian door. Even in the Christian world we have wine as a sacrament. The meaning has been forgotten, and the experience of letting go is not very much present in the environment of churches. But there is no mystical experience without dissolving the ego, with melting away. Or in the Christian tradition, the word is to die in God, to die into God. So there should be a shamanistic practice of some sort, or Dionysian practice, learning to dissolve. And there are ways to do it, like authentic movement. There are disciplines that are contemporary and they're not threatening, and they don't need to imply that we borrow the language of other cultures.
Right.
So I think one would have to do a repertoire of these 6 ingredients that I think are the components of meditation as a stepping stone to the ultimate level, which that's a bit premature for schoolboys to get into it, but the understanding of the nature of mind, or the understanding of one's supreme identity, whatever you call it, the recognition of the essence of what you are.
You did meet many interesting people in the 60s, Claudio. That's what I have heard. I'd like you to tell, what was it like actually when you met Carlos Castaneda for the first time? And how did that happen?
Okay, I knew Michael Harner, who was an anthropologist working almost next door to me. I was in Iper, in the building on the edge of campus, and he was in the Lowy, in the building, the anthropological building was the same as the Lowy Anthropological Museum. Now I think it has a different name. And I didn't know about his existence, but I wanted to go to the Amazon, and I wanted to know whether I should take firearms or not. I wanted to know whether I should take high boots or not because of snakes. How does one prepare for that in the practicalities? And so I called somebody. I called the anthropology department from where I was working, and said, who could give me some advice on this? And the secretary of the department said, I think we should talk to Dr. Harner. And I did, and he was fascinated with my interest in going to explore the Yaqui culture and the Yaqui plant, because he had recently come from a field trip among the Shipibo Indians in Peru, where he took Yaqui, and instead of lasting 6 hours, it had lasted 6 months. He came out of it being a different person. It was like a shamanistic journey. From then on, his life was not just of an observer of shamanism, but an insider with something shamanic. Well, he later founded some kind of school about giving some essentials of shamanism to Americans. So I had already a friendship with Michael Harner. We presented joint papers at the Krober Anthropological Society. I presented the results I got from ayahuasca in Chile, or Yaqui, with these volunteers who knew nothing of what they were taking, and everybody ended up talking about snakes and tigers and other things, many themes. And then he presented his observations among Indians and how the reports matched, even though there was no communication. It was two different cultures, so it was quite sensational. And then one day, this was second limb of my Guggenheim Fellowship, because I went back to Chile to be with my son and touch base with the university, then came back for whatever remained for the 6 remaining months or so. And I got a call from Michael Harner saying, would you be free to come over? I want to introduce you to a fellow shaman's apprentice. And this was Carlos Castaneda. And Carlos had not written any of his books yet. And Michael Harner was inviting both of us to come to Esselen, a little place there on the way to LA, a very beautiful place, and interesting things are being done, and to do a workshop on shamanism. And he had invited a shamaness, a Pomo Indian healer, and some student of anthropology who had an Indian background and a shaman's apprenticeship behind him also. And then Carlos and I would be the remaining 2. And we both identified very much with the role of shaman's apprentices. And I was an impoverished Chilean, not student exactly. I was already a medical doctor working for the anthropology department in medical school there, but I was on very low salary, and the Guggenheim paid me $300 a month to be here. And so I didn't have a car, and Carlos drove me to Esselen. And that was the beginning of a friendship, this long 3 to 4 hour long conversation. We exchanged the stories of our lives and our present interests. And when we came to Esselen, we walked together to the door of what is called the big house in Esselen, the older building. And there was a moment of hesitation to knock at the door. We didn't even get to knock at the door. In that moment, the door opened from the inside, and out walks, with a white sweater, a bearded fellow with a no-nonsense expression. That was Fritz Perls. And he introduced himself, and we introduced each other. And I told Dr. Perls that I had read his famous book of the 50s, and I wanted to know whether he had written anything new from then. And he said, I don't feel great compassion for humanity. And a very interesting answer, because it implied the only real reason for writing a book would be having a desire to be helpful. So it was the beginning of, just as I had learned to, I made an acquaintance with Carlos with such an influence in my life, and because I was to be the person closest to him in those years, he felt that he didn't have anybody who was so much a fellow seeker with whom to share his adventures, even though I was in a parallel path. Yet immediately after, I come into contact with Fritz Perls, and that was another important California acquaintance.
But something happened at that conference, I have heard. Something that had to do with Carlos and Fritz Perls.
Well, I have written about an event in that conference which was not exactly between Carlos and Fritz. It was between the shamaness, the Pomo Indian the woman, who was very much challenged by Fritz. Fritz wanted to know what was the meaning of that snake in her dream, and she didn't quite live up to his expectation, because Fritz was aware that the snake is a symbol of healing, it's connected to medicine and healing, and he sort of felt like he knew a bit more than the shamaness. And I felt it was a bit like not honoring what doesn't come into verbal expression quite in an expected way. And in the intermission, he was competing with her implicitly, as he was surrounded by a group of people into which I came. And he was saying, I feel I am also a shaman. If that is to be a shaman, don't you see images while you are working with people? And then he told an anecdote of where, I've told many times, I've written about it, how where a lady is talking with a very shrill voice and nothing is moving forward in the therapy hour. And he says to her, he closed his eyes as if to find inspiration. And as he closed his eyes, he saw a dog barking. Her voice suggested the dog barking. And then he opened his eyes and said, as you talk to me, I experience you as a dog barking at me. And then she melted in tears and for the first time broke through to another level of communication. Oh, my husband tells me the same thing, etc., etc. So he was surrounded by a group of people in an intermission, and he was essentially saying, well, if she's a shaman, I am a shaman too. Don't you see images when you do therapy? And told about this anecdote I've written about somewhere, where he says he's working with a woman and nothing is happening and he's frustrated. He closes his eyes, and as she talks with an unpleasant voice, he visualized a dog barking. So when he opened his eyes, he said to her, as you talk to me, I think of a dog barking at me. And then she immediately started to weep and said, oh, my husband tells me the same thing, and so forth. She recognized her anger or protest and so forth. something started moving, and I felt very admiring for his ability to contact his intuition through images in this way and not get sucked into the outer situation. So,
did Carlos Castaneda on that occasion talk anything to you about Don Juan?
oh yes, he had had the experiences that came to be part of his first book, and he actually invited me to co-author that first book, and I didn't because I got absorbed in the one quest instead. But he did not only tell me, but that was his contribution to the workshop. He talked about a number of the passages that we now find in the early books, the teachings of Don Juan. And then when there was a book review in the American Psychic Society or Psychic Research Society, apparently he recommended that I be the reviewer of the book. I was a reviewer of that book. Much later, he suggested I be one of the people consulted in a book on him, and I didn't want to contribute in spite of that idea because I didn't know how I could formulate an opinion at the time when people were divided. Is he lying or is he saying the truth? And to me it was very clear that he was creating tales of power. He was saying things that were not literally truth, but were truth producing, that were, if you take them to be truth, that opens your mind for some things to happen.
By the way, Claudio, Tales of Power, that book has a very fascinating story going with it. You were helping Castaneda with some translations and giving him some suggestions about certain things in the book. You even had the manuscript, I've heard from somebody.
Yeah, I know. I didn't give him suggestions. He brought me the manuscript one day after a long time I had not seen him, and he said that before giving it to the publisher, I would like your opinion.
Okay.
And I was busy that day. I left it on top of my bed, went out. I don't remember what I was doing that day, but it was a very strange happening. I had just put in a cat door in one of my doors, in my back door, because we had recently acquired a cat, or my girlfriend had, and my house was by a stream in the backyard, not without some relation with Castaneda. My preference to have a stream next to the house, and I did some exercises there. But through the stream came a little animal. I hope I remember the name of this kind of animal, which is like masked like a thief with very...
A raccoon.
A raccoon. A raccoon came into the house through that, and the raccoon stole the manuscript, and there was a tug of war between my girlfriend and the raccoon, and she recovered the manuscript except the first page. And so when I came that night, I found what the raccoon had done, and he had inspected my drawers and broken many pencils. No, had broken the pencil that I was using that day, not the others. So I took that to be a special criticism of the raccoon. A number of strange things happened, and when Carlos came the next day, he laughed very much about, oh, there is power in that manuscript, he said. But then I told him that I thought this image of dissolving, as being thrown into the abyss, that was a very wonderful way of spelling out an inner experience. And he did not appreciate my comment. He said, oh, that's what everybody says. You don't know the power of the Aztecs. You don't know how the Indians have gone in their magic beyond anything white man knows. I think he later conceded, not with me, with others, that it was an expression of an altered state of consciousness, but at that time he was not ready to go public with anything other than the position in the books. I think he served his message so much that he had to sever communication with his friends, or make the communication limited. He could not spell out his total secret.
You also met Muktananda in those
Yes,
days.
yes. That was much later. That was not in the springtime of my journey, but in the fall of my journey. I had gone through a great, well, it was a new birth. It was a spiritual birth. And that was within the time with Ichazo, not in this country, but back in Chile. But then after that, I was getting rid of my school. I taught for a while and shared whatever light was coming through me, and that was a very seminal time. And then withdrew. I became a bit was like the wasteland myth in mythology, you know, the King Arthur and other myths, the dark night of the soul, so to say, at the Muktananda time. And he was very welcoming. He treated me like a friend, not like a disciple. He wanted me to visit all the time, and he wanted to drive home that he was my friend. And sometimes had himself photographed with me, and this is to make it. Once he had me sit in his throne next to him, and so I felt very warmed up by him and supported at a time when I was not feeling so good. I felt I had lost whatever spiritual attainment I had reaped.
So you visited him in his ashram?
In his ashram, yes, which was very near here. And then there were innumerable miraculous events that Muktananda. He was a master of miracles. And I am so sorry I didn't write them up at the time. But I can tell one because it would be so amusing, entertaining, and instructive too. I remember saying, I wonder what will happen to me this time. I hadn't come to visit him in a long time, but a friend of mine said, would you introduce me to Muktananda? So I stood in line with the people waiting for a blessing, introduced my friend, who was Dr. Soskin, professor of psychology in campus, very near the place where we're sitting right now. And Muktananda said, what are you doing here? As if I didn't have to be there any longer. And then I waited for some time for my friend to be ready to leave. And at the moment I was leaving, and somebody approaches and says, you don't remember me, but I want to introduce myself. I'm so-and-so, and we met in such and such. I didn't remember at all seeing him. And he said to me, anytime you need anything, please have me in mind. And I should have said first that I had deliberately thought, every time I come here something extraordinary happens. I wonder if this is going to be the case again, because now I feel not only so far from Muktananda after he had been gone back to India and come back, I had not contacted him. I felt I was going through a kind of blasphemous stage in life. I think just like in psychotherapy there's positive and negative transference, there's something like that with God and with gurus and with this, like jaded and enough of spirituality. It was kind of impermeability. And I said, well, I wonder what would happen. Let's see if I thought what I need. I always had the sense that I got exactly what I needed. That was a miraculous event. Even it was better conceived than I could have formulated. But let me see if I can anticipate. What do I need? And I couldn't come up with anything significant except that I was so much wanting somebody to help me unload a very heavy rug I had in a van that I had borrowed. I had bought a rug for 11 meters long, 11 yards long, and it was extremely heavy to unload from that van. Didn't know how I would do it, especially it was the place where you met me many years ago when you came from Sweden to meet Alan Watts and myself by the way. Then it was very difficult to carry down to that door that you perhaps remember. So I said to this man who was offering help, would you consider helping with the rug, with unloading a rug? Of course, can I bring my friend along? So 2 people came home, and they did such an expert job, not only in unloading the rug, but installing it, and they got knives from I don't know where, special knives, and they cut the material that should go under the rug very expertly, until I said something, but how come you are such experts? Oh, didn't you know we are professionals? We're rug installers.
That's a great story, Claudio. Really magic in that.
Yeah, every time there's some magic of that sort. I never knew how he did it, whether it was just the magic in there, it all happened by itself, or whether Muktananda would say to somebody, do this or do that. At that time I was intrigued. Then I came to think it's more the play of synchronicity and the Guru's presence.
Life here in Berkeley in those days were quite magical and fantastic. What do you remember most, Claudio, from these days in the 60s?
Something about the spirit of the times, the liberation spirit, which has been crushed. It's a time that, out of which came civil rights movements, ecology, activism, feminism, but youth movement. Free speech was just a pretext for the freedom of expression, individual expression. It was the hippie spirit that had two consequences. One in the direction of politics, the other in justice, the other in direction of the therapeutic and the spiritual. And that was very alive. Then it became imitation. It was the soup of the soup of the soup of the duck, more diluted, more commercialized, and the politicians have been able to crush and to criminalize the youth on occasion of psychedelics, to get the people who then had the vigor to speak out for awareness of what was wrong in the world. It's the first time that there were many people who saw the wrongness of the system. Then I think the politicians were able to control that through the media and make it all sound good and just and fair, and we know what we're doing, and we're persecuting the bad people, and we're doing the best we can to make this the best of countries in the world. But I think at the time it was not a spirit of revolution. It was just stepping out of the system and seeing it with humor and being free from it, and inviting others to step out of it too, to be more autonomous and independent.